So thank you. This is totally fascinating. Really, just totally fascinating. I won't be as evocative as Ben, I think, in giving a summary of all, but I've learned a tremendous amount. I want to thank the organizers for just a really, really interesting set of sessions. Here, I'm going to be building off a little bit what we talked about with that Rahul started to go down, to really thinking about this term ecosystem, and I'm going to be focusing very primarily on the world of entrepreneurship and growth, though I think some of the work that I'm going to talk about here might have some refraction to the broader set of things that we talked about. So, oh, that's not it. Let's see if we can find a clicker that works. Ah, very good. So, we haven't spent much time on this. In this particular conference, this has mostly been about that other, kind of engine of economic growth, science and technological progress. But it's fair to say that in economics, in broader public debate, there's kind of a broad understanding, at least whether or not it's correct or not, who knows, but sort of, right, people believe that somehow economic growth over the long term, somehow enabled by some sort of entrepreneurship. And obviously those are ideas that go back to Schumpeter, even earlier than that, and over the past 20 years there's been kind of revived interest in really making an attack on that in a wide range of disciplines like economics and sociology and on its own terms. And the question is, when people talk about entrepreneurship and its relationship to economic dynamism, kind of what are they talking about? I think they're talking about this. You say, what is this? This is the Santa Clara Valley in 1926. And if you look extremely carefully, this place, right, now hosts the new Apple headquarters. Like literally, the Apple headquarters is about a mile down, actually. Okay, this farm was, right? And it's fair to say, most of us have obviously been there. 1926 is a long time ago, but basically what you've had is the transformation of a region that kind of had orchards into this incredibly vital, innovation-driven entrepreneurial ecosystem. And that raises a ton of things. Today's New York Times, right? Steve Case throwing a ton of money into startups in the heartland to sort of revive dynamism outside of the kind of supposed clusters of Silicon Valley, a few other places. Now, what's interesting, though, is I say Silicon Valley. When Rahul brought up Silicon Valley just earlier, you all thought you knew what that was. Here's an actual picture from Google Maps of Silicon Valley. Feel the innovation. Feel the entrepreneurship, right? How would you ever know that this is actually like where it's happening, okay? And, and there are a few like tiny clues you could get, right? If you look, and obviously, Cesar, I'm not sure if you're going to talk about the work on Street Map, right? But Cesar and a range of colleagues have done this fascinating work looking at neighborhoods, looking for clues from visual images. But it's fair to say, and maybe this is, I think an easy one for this crowd, but Lord Kelvin, my favorite Lord, kind of had it right when he sort of talked about the fact that how we understand concepts is not, and how we advance the science that's based on concepts only happens if we can connect that to some systematic form of measurement. That doesn't mean, of course, and in fact does not negate the importance of very deep dive, qualitative, phenomenological, anthropological understanding of social phenomena, but it does say that it's extremely hard to understand the kind of systematic things that we like for policy, for management, and to understand what's going on, to do science in this area without some sort of systematic measurement framework. Let me be clear that in the world of entrepreneurship, that has been a huge challenge. So just to give you like a clue, right? On the one hand, if you go to the government way we measure entrepreneurship, which is effectively counting the number of new businesses per year that report hiring an employee, their first employee, okay? And that is the kind of core measure of entrepreneurial activity according to the US government, okay? And if you look at that in a series of papers, John Halterwanger and many colleagues, Javi Miranda and others, but John Halterwanger and his crowd have really pioneered this study. It's excellent work, and they give you a big message that if it has completely affected the macroeconomic debate in this country, that entrepreneurship is on the decline. That's the message. We don't have too many VCs here. I think a few people are on the fringes of that in this group. But when you actually look at, and you almost, in Rahul's discussion, right, it was almost implicit, entrepreneurship seems to be where things are going on these days. Right? Look at VC investment, that's way up. 20% of MIT grads, upon graduation, join a startup. That's from like 5% 15 years ago. Now, maybe they're joining this much smaller number of firms, and they're going to whatever, but, right? But there seems to be something interesting happening in the world of startup land. And so the question is, how do you even think about, is entrepreneurship in a decline or in a boom? That's like a first-order question you'd want to have a good answer to get some of that shared understanding we were just talking about. Mark Andreessen, a famous both innovator as well as venture capitalist, right, tweeted out here. This is there'll be no offensive tweets during this particular talk, but right, there's too much entrepreneurship, disruption running wild. There's too little entrepreneurship, economy stalling out. And let me be clear, this is not just like some theoretical debate. It really affects how you think about a wide range of funding and activity across any number of programs, initiatives, activities. And just to kind of sharpen it, right, there's a lot of efforts to promote entrepreneurship. And let me be clear, the empirical basis for promoting entrepreneurship is not like the empirical basis for supporting R&D or science. It's on a just much shakier basis. Josh Lerner from the Harvard Business School wrote this wonderful book. If you haven't read it, I highly recommend it, Boulevard of Broken Dreams. Went out, looked at all these efforts to promote entrepreneurship, and came up with two conclusions. Conclusion number one, by and large, the people doing these efforts were well-meaning. They were trying to do the right thing. Number two, most efforts failed. Most of these big initiatives did not work, and moreover, there was little accountability for those failures over the term. And so the question is, how do how do we even think about that in some sort of systematic way that perhaps could either say we shouldn't be doing these things, we should do them in a different way, we should make real action a priority, okay? And so in other words, so really almost motivated by this book, Fiona Murray and myself and Bill Allett at MIT convened the MIT Regional Entrepreneurship Acceleration Program, where we work with stakeholder regions around the world in the service of really bringing together those ecosystems through a stakeholder-led approach and using that as a way to really kind of understand their systems in some sort of systematic way, choose prioritized strategies with accountability. We work with about 37 regions around the world at this point. And one of the kind of key challenges that came from that was just you would bring senior level stakeholders in any regional group, and they would just have vastly different perceptions of the ground truth of the ecosystems in which they're a part. What's going on? Things are great, things are not so great. Moreover, as a senior policymaker from one of our regions mentioned to me, she looked at me and she said, how would I know? You're telling us we're going to go invest all this money. How would I know that our efforts to promote growth entrepreneurship were successful, even if they were successful? And I said something, it was over dinner, I was like, economic growth and social progress over the long run, which is usually the answer we tend to give in our crowd. And she looked at me and she said, Scott, I'm not sure that I'll be dead by that time, but I'm sure that I will be retired. Too long, right? Totally not actionable, total no accountability. And it really prompted my thinking. I ended up, really coming to kind of say, how do we grapple with, how do we create metrics around ecosystems that are meaningful in real time to capture the phenomena of growth-oriented entrepreneurship? How do we do that in a real way? And that led, ultimately, and I should really kind of highlight one person here more than any, Jorge Guzman, a doctoral, has just received his doctorate from MIT, and he was really the kind of I gave him that task in a very open-ended, unstructured way, and he has taken this project and really been the engine behind a huge amount of just fascinating work that I'll be able to report on. And the idea was to really think how we could attack this problem in some sort of systematic way. Okay, I'm going to right? So what did Jorge do? Right, and so a bunch of this work is with me, but as I said, Jorge really is core of his thesis and his approach. So the first insight is to recognize that if you're going to start measuring entrepreneurship, and I love what Rahul did bringing Crunchbase, the problem is Crunchbase has a very, very selected group of firms. And almost all data on entrepreneurship suffers from the fact that you're not seeing, right, you hear the firms that go and select in or have news articles written about them or do adventure deals, but that's already well on into the process. How do you know what attracts investment if your sample is composed of firms funded by venture capital? That's a little unfair to Crunchbase, but just to kind of give you the sense. Okay? So what first order insight was that by and large, every single not just by and large, 100%, every single firm that ultimately grows needs to register their business. It's like a very stupid point, and it's not controversial, right? That's would be like stage 0 in the playbook, okay? The second insight is to recognize, though, right, people can look at counts of business registrations, but when you think about what's the average data, row in a data set of business registrants, you're going to very quickly get to tremendous amount of Jorge's, Cesar's Pizza. Sorry, I'm going to make fun of you, Cesar. Okay? So Cesar, and if your business is Cesar's Pizza, you are almost inevitably some dude named Cesar who wants to sell pizza. And you're going to, and success for you would be making Cesar's Pizza 2 across town where your brother or wayward cousin goes and makes the same pizza. Okay? Right? Sorry, Cesar. I imagine your pizza's excellent. Okay? On the other hand, when Jeff Bezos founded Amazon, he was likely to fail. That was unknowable at the time whether or not he would succeed or not. But he did a whole bunch of things. He made choices super early on, and make that word choice. All this is endogenous, but he made a series of choices, and he registered in Delaware. He immediately got a trademark. He registered as a corporation. He named himself Amazon.com, world's largest bookstore, not Jeff's bookshop. Okay? Right? And then finally, and this is the key, is that some firms, though rare, actually do grow. Right? We know about Amazon because it's the biggest company on earth now. We know for sure, right, that like anyone who has an IPO, big acquisition, those are very observable. And that allows you to then to think, okay, what I'm going to do is I'm going to regress success. You could do this in a very simple prediction model. You could use machine learning, right? But it's basically just a prediction model. I'm going to regress the rare successes against these digital signatures of growth potential, how you name yourself, corporation, Delaware, patent, trademark, early, against the full population of business registrants. And then that will allow you, but remember, it's not causal, okay? But what that will allow you to do then is form an estimate of the probability of growth of every firm that registers a business. So here's, sorry, I forgot that I had this slide, so you can see, here's the Harvard bookstore. That business has been around for 70 years. Local business is going to remain a local business. Very good for them. Amazon.com, very different. So we're going to take advantage of that heterogeneity, endogenous as it is, to come up not with a causal estimate of the impact of naming, but instead to come up very specifically with a prediction. It turns out, I've done a lot of empirical work in my life, this is one of the most informative regressions you can ever run. Okay? So it turns out, name the firm after yourself, you're 70% less likely to grow. Okay? So growth here is the achievement of an IPO or large acquisition, right? We also have done work, it really changes almost not at all. If your firm has more than 1,000 employees, 7 or 8 years after founding. Corporations, much more likely to grow. Trademark within the first year, 600% more likely to grow. Specifically, if you register your firm in Delaware, which kind of opens you up to more sophisticated corporate governance, and apply or acquire a patent within your first year of founding, you are 20,000% more likely to grow. Okay? Just to give you what kind of that range is. So we have another paper, which actually, no matter how skewed you think the distribution of predicted entrepreneurial quality is, it is even more skewed than that. It is more skewed than even a traditional power law distribution. So think of power law. In the last 1% of the power law, it's even more skewed than that. It kind of accelerates. Okay? The top 1% of our predictions account for more than 50% of all success events in the United States in the past 30 years. The top 10% of our predictions between 75 and 80% of total. So we're able to predict out of sample 80% of successes from 10% of the sample. What does that allow you to do? And Brad is here. He was a kind enough editor on the first paper we had, which I thought was the only paper, well, was among, I guess other papers could win this as well, but that was at least the candidate for the Ig Nobel Prize Award, right? Where is Silicon Valley? Most people think they already know the answer to that. Right? We asked the question, where's Silicon Valley? So we were able to look at, just using California registration data, using this method. If you look at Los Angeles versus San Francisco, actually the number of companies in those two regions, number of startups, is very, very similar, right? But the difference is that once you dig in and kind of look at these predictions for every single firm and then kind of aggregate up, you're able, and let me make sure I get this right? Los Angeles over here, right, has, think of darker here, each is kind of an order of magnitude of higher quality, right? Mostly white, kind of mostly right, only a few things right here, actually at Irvine, a little bit by Caltech, a little bit by UCLA, right? On the other hand, you look at Silicon Valley, right? There's this deep, consistent across a whole set of zip codes, these kinds of very dark regions showing this kind of much higher average quality for the average business. And of course, most of the businesses, even in Palo Alto, are dry cleaners. It's just there's enough, right, perspective, those people who are caught in Rahul's database, that they're bringing up the total average. Okay? That, we sort of, based on that and some other early work, we then expanded that with some support from the Kaufman Foundation to as much of the United States as we could capture. We're about 85% covered out in the United States, about 34, 35 states right now. And that has allowed us to construct an integrated database over 25 years that sort of allows you to look at entrepreneurial quality at an arbitrary level of granularity, right, and calculate these 4 statistics. 1, you'd be interested for a zip code or even an address. How many businesses were formed? The second is, what's the average quality of those businesses? What's the average potential for growth of the businesses formed there using this predictive analytic approach? The third is, you're not so much interested in quantity or quality to really get at the growth potential of a region. You'd want to know quantity, quality-adjusted quantity. And that's going to be this notion of RECPI, the Regional Entrepreneurship Cohort Potential Index. And then, right, there's an analytics problem. We can score how we're doing over time, and we can say, so many firms were formed in the 2000 cohort. What happened to them? Let's score in 2007. Did we get as many growth outcomes as we thought? Fewer, right? Just about the right amount. And so we can take the ratio of actual success events relative to our prediction. Does that make sense? Okay. So what is that able to do? So this is a kind of zip code level visualization of all the zip codes that we have. What you can sort of see here, there are a few states that we can't get that kind of micro detail. So the New York, for example, it doesn't mean that there's a lot of entrepreneurship going on upstate New York. That means that the average of New York is relatively high. But what you can see here is that there are massive differences. What is the darkest place in this graph? Is the area right around Silicon Valley, right? Boston area. And there are places that have lots of entrepreneurship, Florida, but relatively little growth-oriented entrepreneurship. Okay? Just to kind of dig this down, this is a visualization of every single business formed in 2012, 2013 in the broad Bay Area, what we might call Silicon Valley. and you can sort of see three things from this graph. First, there's no entrepreneurship at the airport, so that's good. Okay, it's good check. Second, this kind of black hole, literal, right? The little white dots right in the middle, that's the faculty ghetto, for those who know that place. That's where faculty members would have LLCs or whatever for their consulting activity, but then right around campus is this kind of wall of entrepreneurial quality, Sand Hill Road, right? These are the precise locations of some of those accelerators that grew up in the kind of early 2000s, and we would have been able to capture them in exactly real time. And then lastly, from an inclusive innovation, inclusive entrepreneurship, right? The East Bay is not really part of Silicon Valley, right? It's got a lot of entrepreneurship, lots of, that's where your pizza company's going to be there, Cesar. Sorry about that, okay? What does that else allow you to do? So if you could just play this. Down there, right? So this is the area just around MIT. This goes back to the 80s. We can see right here over here is kind of Central Square, Cambridgeport. For those of you who went to school around here, you drank and went to Cesar's Pizza, so on and so forth. Here's the rise of Kendall Square, okay? This bubble starts getting smaller because the rents rise because so many firms are successful. Where does everybody move? They move over to 1 Kendall Square. So we're able to we're able to sort of see, we're able to see in real time the kind of evolution of the microgeography of entrepreneurship, both accounting for quantity and quality at the same time in an integrated way. Once you make this quality control, it turns out the news is actually not so bad on entrepreneurship. There are many other things wrong with America, I'm sure, okay? But this is not among them, right? This is RecPie divided by GDP. Once you adjust for quality, there are no more mom and pops. That's what's explaining the decline in entrepreneurship. Once you adjust for quality, actually, by 2014, we're basically back to the peak that we observed during the dot-com boom, okay? On the other hand, the problem with American entrepreneurship is not one of founding new businesses. It actually turns out to be scaling new businesses. But that's a different policy agenda. It will lead to a very different diagnostic, okay? Just to be clear, right, the actual relationship between quantity and quality, right, and economic growth, there's very little, right, there's very little, in fact, zero statistical relationship, and it's basically a straight line relationship between quantity of entrepreneurship and subsequent economic growth in a region. Quality has a pretty strong positive relationship, though highly noisy. And that's not surprising. There's lots of other things that drive economies, right? Allows you to do very granular program evaluation. So this is something we did for OSTP at the end of the Obama administration. It's not perfect. It's not published, but it sort of looked at 2 of these I-6, which was a Obama-era initiative. We're able to kind of say, if you only looked at quantity, you would see no change in the program. Once you sort of adjust for quality, you see large impacts of a particular program. Okay? Can you just play this, please? Great. We'll see, if we can get this up and running. So this is basically a visualization of the entire United States, and just put in Irvine, California. In fact, if you just go over, I think, yeah. And then it kind of comes in. This is basically where we are. Just give it 2 seconds. Boom, 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 boom. Okay, hold on. We should have preloaded. Here we go. Okay. And basically what you can do is for any year, for any location, you can start to look at the underlying geography. If you can just do one thing, which is move that all the way back, that slider, right, all the way back there. Right, just this region, for those of you who know Irvine for a long time, this region was not like it was today, 25 years ago. There's really been, and you see that real thing happening in these data in real time. So you can really use this as an economic development tool. Okay, could you go back to my presentation, please? Thank you so much. Last. Okay, great. Okay, we've done a ton of other work around this. Just to give you one paper with Valentina Tartari from the Copenhagen Business School, we've used zip code level aggregates to then look at, for example, the impact of being near a university on local entrepreneurial ecosystems and how that's changed over time. Then in a kind of other part of the paper, we look at how changes in federal funding have changed that. And one of the kind of interesting things that you see is that basically, this kind of captures this university advantage and moreover, it's kind of widened over time. So university entrepreneurial ecosystems become more important over time, and there's more sensitivity to federal funding to entrepreneurial ecosystems over time. Okay? We've been able to extend this to not a wide range, but a range of new countries. This is a postdoc at MIT who took this basic methodology, opened up the Spanish business registry, was able to do this relatively quickly. Another project's going on in Norway and a number of other regions throughout the world, including Canada. Lastly, we've been able to kind of use this to kind of like really get granular about what role venture capital and other institutions play. This is with Christian Catalini and also with Jorge. And just to kind of give you kind of the punchline there, it turns out that the same things that predict growth, if you train the model on you get VC, and then you get rid of all the VC-funded firms, and you look at growth as a function of you should have gotten VC among firms that never receive VC, that's highly predictive of an ultimate growth outcome. So there seems to be kind of single playbook for growth, at least in entrepreneurship in the US over the past 30 years. Lots of other things. Just to be clear, I want to make clear, we, all this data, so the individual level data is available for visualization. You can make kind of movies. But we don't, because of a variety of confidentiality, we can't give that kind of firm level data out. But what we have made available is all this data available, in kind of standard formats at the level of zip codes and at the level of counties. Okay, what else do I got to say? I want to thank, Lab for Information Science and Policy, Fiona Murray, Kathy Fazio, Jorge and myself, and RJ Andrews, who's one of, who is a former student of mine, an actual MBA student who is really, I think, pushing the frontiers of visualization in a wide variety of contexts. And I want to thank him for this great work he did on the visualization piece here. So, thank you very much. Look forward to any questions.